thank you for introducing me, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me and putting together these great panels. So my presentation is going to be a case study on a Romanian artist that I've been working on, Leah Burgess, and her artist archive. And I'm going to start from the local context and then move on to regional connections and then more global implications of what I'm interested in. Okay, so in Romania, history after 1989 begins with the archive. An archive that sought to control the lives of millions for decades has been at the center of public debates in the country in the last 20 years. Based on minute data gathering, privileged access, and gears towards institutionalized oppression, the Securitate or Secret Police Archive marks the disjuncture between official histories and suppressed narratives that continue to plague the nascent democracy in this country. For a decade after the fall of socialism, the powers of state refused to subject this archive to the scrutiny of the collective body. In this period, files were lost, discarded, while some were explicitly used as a form of political blackmail. It is only in more recent years that the National Council for the Study of the Securitate Archives has begun to allow access to this archive on an individual basis, while publicizing only some lists of informers and collaborators. By keeping control over the negative chapter of recent history, the Securitate Archive is symptomatic of the suppression of memory in Romania, denying healing and reconstruction of civil society. Okay, so this is the historical background that frames my presentation today, in which I will illuminate the creative uses of another archive in the practice of Romanian artist Leah Burgess, connecting it with a broader archival impulse that has emerged in the past 15 years in contemporary art from the former East. And we can talk about these terms, former East, former West. In his essay, The Archival Impulse, art historian Hal Foster examines the contemporary phenomenon of artists as archivists, arguing that artists have moved away from viewing history largely in terms of traumatic events to archival interventions as gestures of alternative knowledge or counter-memory. So building on this argument, which Foster presents to us that is limited to the Western context, my presentation will use Burgess's practice as a case study for participatory models for culture, reclaiming the role of artists as intellectuals and socially oriented art's potential to reveal a world beyond empirical and manifest order of knowledge. Using her own archive as a tool for inquiry, knowledge, and openness, Burgess has consistently engendered local and international exchanges between artists, scholars from all fields, and students seeking to restore social cultural connections that had been destroyed during the pre-1989 segregation. Her practice evolved from performance art throughout the 80s, in which she politicized her own body as a sign of resistance to the control of the state, to focusing on the body of contemporary art and to the concretization of new knowledge instruments that respond to different social political frameworks of the former East, but also in dialogue with the international audiences. Burgess's archive includes original artworks, which she conceptualizes as aesthetic models for civic engagement. They take the form of newspapers, timelines, and mind maps, revealingly entitled Sense, Globe, 1990 to Today, Short Guide, Art in Public Space, Some Independent Positions, Waiting Room, Subjective Art History from Modernism to Present Day. Through these tools, the artist subverts positions of authority that control knowledge, emancipating the individual to generate his or her own system of formulating questions, finding answers, and becoming more engaged in civil society. Describing herself as, quote, a detective in art, a text jockey copying, reading, cutting, and remixing texts and images, the artist has repeatedly stressed the desire to recuperate for her community in Romania what her generation was denied before 1989. She explains that the archive, as she now conceives of it, as a repository of documents and a space for critical thinking, was born in 1985. It was in this year that Leah Burgess and her partner, the artist Dan Burgess, which some of you may know, opened their apartment in Oradea for informal gatherings with local writers, journalists, actors, artists, and curators. So for this period, which was one of very dark period for Romania, it was a bold affirmation of faith in the power of sharing and teaching to engender unofficial networks that for many were the only breath of normality in those historically trying situations. And the artist has stressed that it continues to be a survival strategy that is valuable today in the era of globalization and, as she puts it, in the era of also confusion of information, as it was in the heavily controlled local context from which it emerged. In 1990, the Burgesses were offered a studio from the Union of Artists in Bucharest, which they began transforming into an archive for books, magazines, and ephemera, as well as repository of their own works. Accumulated over 20 years, this archive dealt not only with contemporary Romanian and international art practices, but grew to be concerned more broadly with the production of knowledge in the humanities, social sciences, and even science and technology. For Leah Burgess, what she would coin as the Contemporary Art Archive in 1997 became an aesthetic model in itself for not only collecting but also the organization of information, its classification, and the development of criteria to engage this information. She challenged audiences further to establish their own parameters for discerning through this material that she collected by inviting them to her studio. And these were not only local students, artists, intellectuals, but she invited all these people from other fields that she met internationally to Bucharest. So it was a constant exchange between the local and the international context. So using the archives as a basis, the activities at the contemporary CAA became focused on analyzing strategies in the Romanian cultural scene and beyond. They supported different innovative programs, critical methodologies, and offered a basis for art activism. In 2003, the Contemporary Art Archive began operating under the title CAA Contemporary Art Archive Center for Art Analysis. The challenge in the space's taxonomy marked a shift from the traditional understanding of the archive as a platform for collecting and presenting material to what its actual function became over time. That is a space for communication, empowerment, reflection, and activism around the social and political relevance of art and culture and context. Leah Burgess channeled this educational impetus with social political engagement, which for her is a definitive characteristic of leading self-reflective existence. Visitors to the Contemporary Center for Art Analysis also received Burgess's self-published documents, which are critical tools that commented on local and international initiatives in the art field. Further, Burgess streamlined the documentation and practices of CAA into CAA Kit, and she traveled globally with her own Duchampian boîte en valise, inviting international audiences to become detective in art themselves. That is, to analyze, judge, and learn and act for the future. And I'm showing here two exhibitions, one in South Korea and one in London, but she's also exhibited in North America, in Colombia, in China. So, I'll go back to that towards the end of my presentation. So Burgess's kit usually comprises of detective materials, timelines, and mind maps, material carefully selected from her archive around a certain theme or corresponding to a particular historical event, depending on where it is exhibited. So I will just present a select few projects, and I will illuminate their role in allowing the public to figure out their own models of analysis and organization of information that corresponds to one's actual needs and experiences. So my first example is from the Romanian context. For contemporary Romanian art, institutional networks based on transparency are an urgent need, and one which the powers of state have handled without consulting the artistic community, nor the public that benefits from its production. So this newspaper issue called Detective Draft 2005 focused on the problematic establishment of the first National Museum of Contemporary Art in Bucharest, inside the House of the People, or also known as Ceausescu's Palace. I'm sure a lot of you know about this building. It's quite famous. It's the third largest building in the world, after the Pentagon and the Chicago Merchandise Mart. Fun fact. This building has since 1989 become transformed into the Palace of Parliament, which was another sort of scandal, and a lot of people were against it. And in 2004, it was transformed, a wing of it was transformed into the National Museum of Contemporary Art. So this issue investigated the context in which the museum was established, laying out for the general public the raging debates over the use of the space, the artists that were invited, and some were blacklisted because they were refused to exhibit in this space, and sort of authoritarian appointment of its leadership. And it is very famous in Romania that the decision to establish this museum was made by our former Prime Minister, Adrian Năstase, which at the time was running for president, and he said, like, we need to modernize, we need a museum of contemporary art. And people were like, okay, good, we're happy you're interested in this. And it's like, well, we'll just put it in the House of the People. And, for us it was, how can you make that association, contemporary art, politics, the past? And he said, well, either here or nowhere. And then it was established here. So that's why it's a very famous case. So local and international scholars were prompted to respond to this situation, and most of them strongly condemned the subordination of art to the politics of the state, decrying the compromised democratic ideals that is signaled in a period in which things were supposed to go in the direction of decentralizing power. Finally, in the artist's own statement, Burgess called for witnesses, the general public, to react to this historical injustice and providing them with clues and evidence on how to act. Another project which I will discuss is my subjective art history from modernism to today, in which Leah Burgess recognized the need of young and mature artists in Romania, but not only, also in the former East, to enter into dialogue with the international community and with each other by understanding the construction of art history in a global context. So in this subjective art history, she critically deconstructs the more traditional academic art history confined to textbooks, changing the focus of the discipline from text and images about art to thinking about how they are culturally constructed in different contexts. And she includes not only artists and their works, but also political events when these works were produced, from magazines, films, popular media, newspapers, also exhibition spaces and institutions, so the entities that streamline the reception of art. And it is organized into art historical terms, a timeline illustrating different important dates, images framed by identifying information and the artist's own comments of what it meant for her, and ending with quotes about art and the bibliography. So this is Burgess's own sort of alternative lesson to art historians on how to teach art through an open structure narrative that defies both universalism and objectivity, revealing them to be constraining mechanisms that deny art its radical potential. In a related project to her timelines, she used diagrams, or what she refers to as mind maps, to explore and explode concepts constructed from information appearing in different milieus. As the artist herself explains, quote, "These works helped me to understand the development of history and then to see how my art also developed in different historical contexts," end quote. Mind maps are drawings consisting of handwritten concepts researched by the artist, presented as a network of interconnections and convergences. Each map is organized around a core concept positioned at the center of the composition, building on the core that addresses diverse themes such as ideology, subject, as you can see here, communism, artist, subculture, space and time, or simply question mark. The artist charts relationships and comments culled from different media, which she then constructs each diagram by writing down association and comments that visually evolved like galaxies around the center. Burgess's mind maps are partly legible, executed as shorthand mementos. However frustrating this may prove for the viewer and the critic, They function as more than evidence of the artist's knowledge, but operate as idiosyncratic constructions of language that deny audiences the complete understanding of the works. The maps are meant to activate the desire to know, to explore beyond mere contemplation, by constructing one's own knowledge models within an awareness of the semiotic heritage of concepts. In the past 4 years, the artist has been working and exhibiting plans for a knowledge museum, which is a museum-like installation based on the research file Contemporary Art Archive. Characterized by an interdisciplinary approach, this museum is dedicated to moving away from the exhibition as a spectacle or form of entertainment and towards a learning process of working with an open-ended archival structure. Perjovsky envisions the museum to be structured into several departments: the body, art, culture, the earth, knowledge, education, the universe, and science, reflecting her own interdisciplinary approach to the organization of information. The installation for Plans for a Knowledge Museum comprises of drawings, objects, charts, photos, and colored prints. It is a mental map offering a lens into the processes of selection that inform the artist's view of social, political, and cultural practices, and inviting audiences to similar processes of self-reflection. Revealing of Perjovsky's methods of associating objects and concepts, this material is also there for viewers to investigate and make use of. So it enacts notions of self-archiving and openness as a blueprint that announces the de-hierarchization of art institution. This runs in a line of critique that connects the artist to experimental projects that have also emerged in Eastern Europe or the former East, such as Hungarian artist Tamás Szent-Obi's Portable Intelligence Increase Museum. And I'm not going to go into a description of these. I just want to present them as examples, but of course we can open it up for discussion later. Or Slovenian collectives Irwin's East Art Map project. And I could give you another example. Oh yeah, I think it's here. Yeah. Polish artist Zofia Kulik's from the archives of Via Kulik, in which she reconstructs the practices of the nonconformist circles in the 70s and 80s in Poland. So these kind of experimental projects or interventions into institutional spaces can also be linked to installations even in the West, such as British Collective Art and Language, presentations in the 60s and 70s, another example is French writers André Malraux Musée Imaginaire of 1947, so this imaginary museum or the museum without walls, which intellectualizes the viewer's relation with the work of art. So but going back to Perjovsky's archival practices, out of which this knowledge museum emerged, they are focused on research instruments and are not solely concerned with local art histories, such as the models that I've just presented. Perjovsky also engages in an implicit critique of the Academy and the museum at the same time that she adopts the language of these institutional platforms to decentralize them. In the Romanian context, it is a pretty powerful statement against establishments such as the aforementioned National Museum of Contemporary Art, and it is also a very important space for the lack and precarious situation of contemporary cultural venues today. So it is based on the artist's conceptual models, but what she emphasizes is that the viewer or the audience completes her projects by creating one's own algorithm of interpretation in one's search for meaning. These projects resist fast interpretation, and they require an investment of time, careful consideration, and undivided attention. And in a way, the interdisciplinary models that form the plans for a knowledge museum demand a certain endurance to not just look, but to think and then to act, with the artist giving one the tools necessary to create and not just to criticize. She also leaves unanswered questions, engendering the desire to know more, to ask for more. And this can be seen in her publications, which are partly illegible and partly filled with question marks or exclamation, which prompt, a reaction. So these are for the audience to open, to deconstruct, to go outside this aesthetic model and to think into, what does it mean to be civically engaged. This is sort of the core of my presentation. I just wanted to wrap up to remark that an exciting avenue for debate for me is how this renegotiation that I see in the works of artists that come from places in the former East that have witnessed these ruptures, or we can call them interrupted histories. So it's not only they are not only relevant and useful for their local context and to engender dialogues between artists from the former East, but they are also exhibited globally, and they are spread out. And as I've shown in places like South Korea or Colombia or China, so I'm interested in exploring more this cross-pollinization, which I see in contexts that connect places that have suffered these historical ruptures,